pleasure to be invited by ICMA to speak to you for about 10 minutes on financing transition. But I have to say, the last half an hour has been really instructive because this must be the most resilient group of people in London right now. After a hard night of partying and carousing, we were having pina coladas ordered by the poolside this morning. So that's great. Look, I want to talk about financing the transition, but I want to start by taking you back just under 5 years to COP26 in Glasgow. Some of you will have been there. Certainly many of your institutions will have been represented there. And I do think that that was a recent high point in terms of the commitments made by financial institutions, made by corporates, but of course also countries. It was definitely the first business COP where we actually had the CEOs of the largest financial institutions, the largest corporates in the world coming together alongside world leaders. And we managed to go from less than 30% of the global economy covered by a net zero target to over 90%. We had $130 trillion of assets, of private money, committed to help the world move to net zero as part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which was put together by some guy called Mark Carney, whatever happened to him. We also managed to get a commitment to countries to phase down the use of coal. And when you add up all of the commitments that were made, the International Energy Agency estimated that if all the commitments were delivered, the world was heading towards 1.8 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels. Now, those of you who have studied the Paris Agreement will know that the world agreed in 2015 that we would do everything we could to limit global warming to below 2 degrees and moving to a limit of 1.5 degrees. So at the time I said that we'd achieved a fragile win, but I said 1.5 was on life support. So almost 5 years later, where are we? Well, we breached 1.5 in 2024, and we breached it last year. We'll see what happens this year. And many scientists are warning that this breach is going to be permanent in a few years. And we are, of course, also seeing headwinds when it comes to climate action that's coming from politics. But I have to say to you, the political rhetoric that we've seen from some places, particularly from the US, does not change the basic science. And the basic science tells us that the world is getting hotter. Those of you who have studied the words of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will also know that they're pretty clear as well. Human activity is unequivocally responsible. And you see the impact of this on many millions of lives and livelihoods across the world. You see that on the news just about every day, the impact on infrastructure. And the reality is that we may be getting close to breaching 1.5, but every fraction of a degree continues to matter. Now, for me, the good news is that many governments, many financial institutions, including those in this room, many corporates, continue to recognize there is a big economic opportunity of transitioning the global economy. And look, we have seen real progress over the last 5 years. Let me give you 3 proof points. Firstly, last year, for the first time, more electricity globally was generated from renewables than from coal. That's big. 10 years ago, less than 1 in 100 new cars sold globally were electric vehicles. Last year, it was 1 in 4. And China, which is the biggest market, 6 in 10 new cars sold every year are now EVs. That makes a huge difference. And when we talk about financing the transition, of course, the money going towards the transaction has also doubled over the last 5 years to 2.3 trillion last year. And the good news, as far as I'm concerned, is that clean energy investment globally is outpacing investment in fossil fuels by a margin of 2 to 1. These are not just environmental wins. These are economic wins because jobs have been created, new industries have been built from the ground up, and that's what matters at the end of the day in terms of driving economic growth. But we also have to acknowledge that we are falling short in terms of financing the transition. I talked about the 2.3 trillion. The reality is that if you want to meet the climate commitments that the world has said, it needs to be several multiples of this by 2030. And most of this money has gone into commercially mature technologies like clean energy and electric vehicles, and only a small percentage, less than 10%, has gone into emerging technologies, into helping those hard-to-abate sectors transition. And here's a real nub. The vast majority of this money has gone and been deployed in the US, in Europe, and in China. The least developed countries saw less than 3% of this money. Now, friends, if we want a balanced transition across the world, we have to ensure that more funding reaches emerging markets and developing economies. And there are solutions that are being deployed. There are solutions being deployed to deal with the challenge of the high cost of financing in these markets, of FX risk, and of course, the lack of a pool of bankable projects. We just need to scale up, really scale up some of these solutions. Now, I talked about a lot of this money going into clean energy, and of course, that is vital in terms of the transition globally. But that alone is not going to get us all the way to a net zero global economy. We also do need to have a real impact on the hard-to-abate sectors, and I'm talking about steel, cement, heavy transport, chemicals. We need to help them get the financing to move from the grey to the green. And frankly, it matters for companies trying to stay competitive. It matters for investors looking to future-proof investment opportunities. It matters for workers looking for secure jobs in the industries of the future. And I just want to be very clear about this. I am not, and I don't think any of us are necessarily talking about some great moral imperative to decarbonize. This is about economics, pure and simple. Failing to decarbonize ultimately risks corporate profitability, and you in this room understand that. Now, the UK government and the City of London recognise this challenge on the need to help the hard-to-abate sectors transition. And I do think, and we heard this also in the fireside chat, the UK is really very well placed and is a natural centre for raising transition finance for domestic as well as international needs. We are a recognised global financial hub. We've got a strong legal system, as we heard. We've got world-class institutions, deep pools of capital, and we operate in a favourable time zone. However, and this is what I say to my friends in the UK government, this is a time-limited opportunity which the UK has to seize now. If it doesn't, it's going to get eclipsed by other more nimble markets. And that is why the UK Transition Finance Council, which I chair, was set up last spring by the City of London Corporation and the UK government. And the council has a very clear aim: to help build the practical foundations for a UK transition finance market that is open, that is investable, and that is aligned with international standards. Last year, and some of them are in this room, last year 80 leaders from the world of finance, industry, policy, government, and public institutions came together as volunteers to progress the work of the Transition Finance Council. And our work focused on three areas: on integrity, on transition roadmaps, and scaling finance. And over the past year, we have produced a set of draft guidelines, which, if adopted by corporates, provide a standard framework for high-emitting companies to secure capital for their transition. We've also published a generic finance playbook to help sectors prepare a finance playbook for that sector's transition. And of course, that means industry sitting down with government, sitting down with the financiers, so you actually have a plan that is financed and can be delivered. And we've also set out a whole range of policy recommendations to government, all aimed at helping to increase the flow of transition finance. Now, of course, the Council's work is not happening in a vacuum. We are seeing momentum around the world. We are talking to our counterparts internationally. Many of them are here as well. And there are, I know, meaningful discussions that are going on the use of blended capital, blended finance, targeted subsidies to channel capital to where it's most needed. And it's why I believe that the work of the Council on transition finance guidelines and sector transition pathways matters, because it sends a strong signal that the UK is serious about shaping a high-integrity, globally interoperable transition finance market. Now, we are going into our second year, and there are three things that we want to try and achieve. One is to make sure that the guidelines that we produce become globally recognized reference points. The second is to road test these guidelines. That's already happening. We've got a whole bunch of financial institutions that are doing it. If any of you are interested, please get in touch. And we're also looking to develop new instruments to increase the flow of transition finance. And I know later in this conference you're going to hear from Japan about what they have done in terms of getting a sovereign transition bond off the ground, actually very successfully. So I just want to close with this. Progress on the transition is real, but it's also uneven. But I do think if we act boldly and pragmatically, the rewards are huge. And I'm talking about economic growth, the creation of new industries, good jobs, more resilient supply chains, and a leadership position for the UK to be the place to raise transition finance. And we know, and you demonstrate that in this room, we know that private capital is looking to find an investable home. But it needs enabling conditions, clear policy, credible plans, consistent signals. And we know that government support can capitalize markets, but that support needs to be focused, agile, and above all, timely. And we also know that the transition must be built around people, workers, communities, and consumers, if it's going to be just and lasting. Friends, this is not just a climate story. In my view, this continues to be the economic story of the 21st century, a story of growth, of innovation, and of leadership. And I hope, with your help and support, we can work together to make London the capital of that story. Thank you.